Today, the Leaders Learning from Leaders podcast is delighted to welcome three highly experienced leaders with connections to the Schlechty Center in Kentucky. The Schlechty Center has a mission to create engagement-focused schools. They sponsor a superintendent leadership network, and they serve as the legacy home of the National Superintendents Roundtable. Joining us today is Dr. Steve McCammon, President and CEO of the Schlechty Center and the Executive Director of the National Superintendents Roundtable. He joined the center in 2013 after serving for 12 years as the Superintendent of Schools in the Fife School District in Tacoma, Washington. Also joining us is George Thompson, the former president and current director of strategic initiatives for the Schlechty Center. George joined the center in 1995. Prior to that, he served 19 years in Gwinnett County Public Schools in Georgia as superintendent, administrative assistant to the superintendent, high school principal, and elementary school principal. And also joining us is Dr. Jim Lloyd, the current superintendent of Olmsted Falls City School District in Ohio. This is Jim's 12th year as superintendent. Prior to becoming the superintendent, he worked for Olmsted Falls Schools as the assistant superintendent in charge of curriculum, instruction, and assessment, and he also served as a school psychologist. Welcome, gentlemen. It's great to have you here.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Steve, I'm wondering if you could kick us off with kind of a overview information about the Schlechty Center and your support for school leaders. And George and Jim, be sure to just chime in as we go.
Well, thank you, Steve. It's great to be here with you today. And we really appreciate the opportunity to talk about the Schlechty Center, and it's special to be able to do that with Jim Lloyd, who is one of our most profoundly gifted leaders that we've ever seen in this work. The Schlechty Center is a nonprofit, and we are located in Louisville, Kentucky, founded by the late Dr. Philip Schlechty. And we help school leaders in a myriad of ways. We consider school leaders across the whole landscape of education. We consider teachers as leaders. But in this case, I know we're going to focus a lot more on superintendents as moral and intellectual leaders. And the Schlechty Center helps those school leaders think about, what if you approached our schools and school districts as learning organizations? What if we helped support these leaders to think about engagement-focused schools for both students and for staff? Toward that end, we have, you referenced a Superintendent's Leadership Network. It's a 3-decade-old leadership network where we bring superintendents together around that viewpoint. It's kind of rare today to have an organization that has such a strong viewpoint across 3 decades. But it truly is about, how can we use tools and frameworks and reflective conversation to think about ways to say, let's take that road less traveled and really focus on what student engagement looks like. And for us, that means what capacity needs to be built in the system to, rather than simply state that, to bring that to a reality. I sit a little bit unique on this panel in that while I've been at the Schlechty Center for it's hard to believe I've been at the center now for 11 years. I was a client, though, the entire time I was a superintendent, was in that superintendent's leadership network. And so I come from the Schlechty Center side about, I think, the really good work we do with superintendents, but also having sat in the seat to lead this work. We also have school district networks across the country. We have a National Standard Bearer School District Network. Jim's a member of that. We also have a brand new Pennsylvania Innovative School District Network, where we go in and help schools from the classroom to the boardroom, from the boardroom to the classroom, really think about, we help leaders think about, and I think that's really going to be important for our conversation today. We help leaders think about their role in leading change. Instead of that old model of saying to teachers, care harder, work harder, go to trainings, learn more, care more, we say, what what is each leader's role in the organization to build the capacity to have these things happen rather than simply stating them into existence. So that's what the center is about and what we've been about for 3+ decades.
And Jim, I understand you are a superintendent tied to getting services from the center.
Yeah, we've been involved with the Schlechty Center for, I think this is going on year 9 now. And they have, I mean, I don't know how far you want me to get into the story of the transformative work that we've done, but the Schlechty Center has really allowed us to, I guess they've given us, excuse me, they've given us the tools to be able to do that transformative work.
George, I want to jump to you as I worked my way around the site. I came across the pillars of superintendent leadership in a piece that you had written. So I thought you could jump us into that next.
Sure, be glad to. As Jim mentioned, in his district, he's a leader who's really leading a transformative effort. And as Steve mentioned, Steve McCammon, we're much about transforming school districts from bureaucratic organizations into something that looks more like a learning organization. We don't transform them. We provide the tools and frameworks and technical support for school leaders like Jim who are leading such efforts from the boardroom to the classroom. But in particular, the superintendent, as mentioned, we have a number of superintendent initiatives, a number of superintendents who are involved in various Schlechty Center initiatives. In that learning organization, leadership runs across the organization. So we believe teachers are leaders, not just workers in a factory setting. The principals are not just supervisors, they're leaders of leaders. That the central office, the role of central office ought to be more about building the capacity of the organization than simply monitoring and supervising. And that the role of superintendent is that of moral and intellectual leader. Not that the management functions of the superintendent are not important. It just goes beyond that, especially if you're leading a transformative effort in an organization. As Phil Schlechty used to say, schools are better today than they ever were in the past. So we don't need to go back and implement strategies that were intended for a different era and a different kind of organization. But the rate of change external to the organization is greater than our capacity to keep up. So a lot of the emphasis is on capacity building and focus on the role of superintendent as moral intellectual leader addresses that, the role of superintendent in leading an organization that's going through the kinds of changes that need to be sustained over time. And so while Phil talked about and wrote about the role of moral intellectual leader for many years, and we've used that in various settings to frame our work with superintendents, more and more superintendents were saying, I want more specificity in terms of what that looks like. And so to that end, we have created a tool called Redefining the Role of Superintendent as Moral Intellectual Leader, which includes a number of self-assessments. Really wasn't designed as an evaluative tool. It was designed as a tool that a superintendent with the superintendent's leadership team, the cabinet, with the Board of Education, or whichever audience he might or she might choose, could use that tool for self-assessment and mainly to create a conversation between the superintendent and the board or leadership team. And that led to the development of what we call the pillars of superintendent as moral and intellectual leader. And these are really the anchors. So while we focus a lot on capabilities of superintendent, these pillars serve as the anchors for those capabilities. And they're used really for conversation as much as anything. Superintendents use them for self-assessment, for conversations with their board, et cetera, and includes such things as superintendent models and develops trust. And when we talk about trust here, we're not just talking about personal trust. We're talking about building trust in the system, trust in the organization. There are a lot of staff members have a great deal of trust in their superintendent, but they may not trust the system to be able to support and sustain the changes that are underway. Because typically what happens in schools is you get a new leader and you go in a different direction.
Yeah.
That's why you hear so often a new broom sweeps clean. There's a lot of truth to that. A lot of focus in the pillars on clarifying the vision, and being real clear what you believe yourself as a superintendent. And that relationship between the organization's beliefs and the superintendent's beliefs, focus in the pillars on educating the community, and as opposed to, simply, responding to community. The pillars would suggest that the superintendent, and particularly with the Board of Education, needs to build community and develop common understandings of the challenges that the district faces in the community. I'll mention a couple of others and then I'll stop. But about developing personal relationships, and particularly personal relationships with the board, because we believe the superintendent board should function as a collective entity. And so we also, by the way, have a companion set of pillars for the Board of Education as community builders and as community leaders. And also developing relationships with central office, of course, and with principals. One of the things that Phil Schlechty was always interested in was that, from his point of view, and I think I would agree, that there's very little in the literature about the relationship between superintendents and principals. And we always wonder why that is, and we always assume that in a large district it's because you put people in the bureaucracy between the superintendent and the principal. But that's not true in smaller districts. But so goes the success of the principal, so goes the success of the superintendent, and it goes the other way as well. And so there's emphasis on developing that personal relationship, the superintendent developing that personal relationship with principals, with central office, and of course with the Board of Education. Last thing I'll say is that these pillars really are aligned with what our system approach to focusing on the direction of the organization, and getting clear about who we are as an organization, about what it is that we're trying to accomplish, about our mission, about the relationship that we have with those internal and external stakeholders whose support we need in order to be able to be successful. Jim has done more with these pillars and with these other tools that are included in redefining the role of superintendent, I believe, than any superintendent that we've worked with. And he's got a board that's supportive and is willing to put more emphasis on having a conversation about leadership and what the board can do to support the superintendent in moving his organization in the direction of the leadership of the learning organization. But he also has used this with his principals and central staff and others, and teacher union and others, to try to create a common commitment to moving in the direction of a learning organization. So we're real proud of the work that Jim's done.
Thanks, George.
I had a question that I was going to shoot to you, George, but based on what you just said, I'm going to flip it over to Jim. As I was listening to you, the thought that was going through my mind was superintendent as learner and superintendent as educator.
Yes.
Those two things kind of in a continual loop.
Yes, maybe we should add 2 more pillars.
Jim, you want to respond to that thought of a learner and an educator?
Well, I think being affiliated with the Schlechty group has really put me in a learner role for sure. I'll kind of like walk you back to sort of how we started, and really going to kind of build on what George indicated. Around 2012, when I became the superintendent, we started to take a look at our former strategic plan. And really the main theme of that plan was provide opportunities to students. And we thought we needed to do more than provide opportunities. And for us, it really was, we rewrote our vision statement, and it was to inspire and empower students to make an impact on the world around them. And so that was a pretty bold statement. We were moving out of the provide opportunity business
Yeah.
into the inspire and empower business. And I think once you get into that business and we started to like take a look at it, we recognized that we needed to change, because the problem that we were trying to solve was really one that we hadn't faced before, and there was really no solution for that problem. And a challenge like that really requires you to create and innovate in the midst of the work, and it requires you to be transformative. And so, as a result, we recognized that we needed to transform our organization. And as George and Steve said, really from what school districts are naturally built as, which is a bureaucracy, into one that is a learning organization. And we recognize that learning organizations behave differently. And if our business was moving out of the opportunity business into the inspire and empower business, we needed to be that learning organization, and that required us to transform. And so it was at that time that we became affiliated with the Schlechty organization and really took a look. And this was profound for us. Those system capacity standards that they have, that we used as really kind of like the framework to put on top of our school district to begin to do that transformative work. And I mean, there are 10 overall system capacity standards, but there are 3 lenses that you can use, or that we've used, in order to begin that transformation kind of work. And one is to focus on the future. The other one is to maintain your direction and focus, and then finally to act strategically. And I think for us, as we started to take stock on our own organization and took a look at how we were acting, we knew that we needed to change. And so along that way, I mean, you have to be a learner, because this was all new information for me and for those that work in my school district. And then you have to lead it as well. So you're learning and leading really at the same time. And that's I mean, I let go of the idea that I needed to be the expert long ago. And I think what people have really appreciated is that when the superintendent, the central office administrator, the principal, and the teacher can all be in the same room learning at the same time, I think that there's a lot of, that's profound, I think. And so we started that work, as I said, about 9 years ago. And that system capacity standards really were what we used in order to begin to formulate our directional system and move forward.
So I understood, Jim, that you used that in putting together your own superintendent evaluation. Can you fill us in a little bit more about that?
Sure. I thought, and George talked about the superintendent pillars, not necessarily being an evaluation tool, and I absolutely agree with that. What I thought was, if my job is to help the system transform and be transformative, that it made sense to me that I would use those standards with the board to hold myself accountable for that transformation, right? So, I heard about the super evaluation tool, and I contacted Michael, and I said, certainly Ohio has superintendent standards, which are okay. I mean, they're, you look at them and you think like, these are the kinds of things that you should focus on as far as governance and finances and things like that. But really, I wanted me to be held accountable to the work that we were doing. So talked with him and took those 10 standards and the Schlechty standards for system transformation, and used that as my evaluation tool. Not all of it, but part of it, to hold me accountable for that transformative work. And then also, as the superintendent goes, so should everybody else. So my evaluation started that tool there, used it with my central office staff, used it with my principal staff as well. So we are all in alignment. That didn't happen overnight, certainly, but I think that to having that common direction and having a system that's set up to all have you face forward, and everybody knows what it is that we're accountable for and accountable to, has really helped us.
Steve, I want to toss a question back. We're using the word transformation and transformative in a lot of the descriptions, and I wonder if you want to just give us a straightforward, when people are hearing that word, what should they be thinking?
Well, thank you for that opportunity. One of the things I think about in getting to that answer is a quote that I've heard. I don't know how recent it is, but I think it works really well for what Jim is sharing there. I was on the ground doing an original process with Jim and his team called Taking Stock. And I remember Jim saying at the end, this was a watershed moment. He said to his board that were there, he said to his staff that were there, this is a watershed moment for Olmsted Falls City Schools. We'll be different tomorrow because of what we did here this last day and a half. I remember that distinctly. And the quote that I think really illustrates leaders who get it about this whole notion of transformation is that we don't rise to the level of our goals, we fall to the level of our systems. And I think leaders who truly understand and work with their boards and their stakeholders around, if we get really clear about a directional system and put systems in place, we can actually do significant work. Phil Schlechty talked an awful lot about the difference between change and transformation. And, he used to do this really neat illustrative story of you could look at a Ford truck from 20 years ago and you could look at a Ford truck today. It's changed. It hasn't necessarily transformed. It's changed. But he said it's totally different when you look at a caterpillar. A caterpillar doesn't change into a butterfly. It transforms into something totally different, something that can take wings, something that can do things it maybe only dreamed about before. And I think a school district, one of the things that I know I personally saw leading this work back in my own school district, and the leaders who really get leading change is about, it's very, very difficult work. You've got to be willing to, um, I would say, Steve, when we get into this whole notion of transformation, the reason it's so high leverage is I think the conversations, we do a lot of work with school boards. George Thompson is our lead with designing our school board conferences. I think the conversation we're having today is probably as important as anything about how we can engage school boards. There's a lot of change out there in this country. There's a lot of board members coming for, we still have a lot of incredible school board members across the country. But I think there are some outside influences that are making those conversations quite different. And so I think the leader that really talks about transforming and saying there ought to be a different way to think about work. If we had another hour today, we could ask Jim to talk about how this work and this focus, after 9 years and during that course, he's actually put the systems in place to have conversations now about a new a way to think about accountability. I would say probably wouldn't speak for Jim, but I would say this focus on true transformation has caused not only that work to come to the fore, because you can't transform into where he was wanting to go without changing the way you think about accountability in the system. So thinking about transformation opens up doors to truly dream, because now you have a system in place to address it. Hope that makes sense, Jim.
Yeah, that absolutely makes sense. We could talk about that was the next step for us. Once you start to take a look at the system itself and you realize that you need to become something different than what you were, as Steve said, that's hard work. That's the long game is what it is. I've been fortunate that I've been in my school district now for 18 years, and I've been there for 12 as superintendent. And I certainly have had opportunities to go elsewhere, but I don't want to do that because it's a lot of fun. It's hard, it's very difficult, but it's also a lot of fun as well. And it takes time, and it's not for the faint of heart either. Some of it is cliff diving, in some ways. Sometimes there's a spotter down at the bottom looking to see if there's rocks there. Sometimes there's not. But we, as I indicated, we were doing school pretty well before I got there. We've had a long history of having, on test scores and everything else. But it was when we decided that we were going to move from providing opportunities to being more, directive. We're going to inspire and empower kids. I mean, how do you do that? There's no book on how you inspire and empower kids. And so it was then that we said, yeah, we need to look different. We need to act different, and we need to be different. And so it was really that started our work.
Yeah, when you first mentioned that piece of opportunity, that I've struggled with many schools and districts and even classroom teachers in my coaching work with that, my job is done if I've made the opportunity. And that's a really big difference from my job's not done until what needs to happen happens. And probably by the time that occurs, there's something else that needs to happen.
Right.
And that's why that hard work continues.
Steve, you said at the very beginning, that Phil Schlechty's work was built on engagement, and that certainly is the case. I mean, you need to engage kids, and we thought that was the first step in inspiring and empowering them. I mean, they need to be engaged in order to do that. But we're now, I think that, I sadly never had the opportunity to meet Phil, but I think the next step, if he were still alive, would be beyond engagement, and really define what that picture of success is. And you have to have engagement first. But once you have that, how does that impact learning? And in order to do that within the classroom, as I said, that's where the point of contact is. But the entire system needs to transform itself to go beyond engagement. And it can't be just in one classroom. It needs to be every classroom.
There's another phrase that I was already thinking before you began talking, and now you've taken me further there. So, George, I'm going to ask you if you'd respond to it. I was wondering if the word we're moving towards is dream. Is that a word that fits in here somewhere?
Yeah, I think it does. Schlechty had a different meaning for the word standards. In our current world, we think of standards as being about compliance. And in Schlechty's mind, standards were inspirational and aspirational.
Mm-hmm.
Is what can be. And so those standards that Jim was talking about earlier, those system capacity standards, really represent attributes of an organization that looks more like a learning organization. And they really do reflect, going back, Phil Schlechty's dream, if you will. One of the artifacts that we have of Phil's leadership is a audio video interview of Phil when he was asked, what is your hope for your life's work? And what he described is really everything that we've been talking about, that there'd be more of a focus on engagement than compliance, that the school district would be focused on building the capacity of the organization to support and sustain a focus on students. He also was disillusioned with the focus on opportunity, and I was smiling when the two of you were talking. That I can recall in one audience that was using the word, a group of principals, and he says, so what does it look like? He says, you put a sign on your building that says, all children have an opportunity to learn here. We hope your child is one of them.
Yeah.
And so,
I love it.
It's aspirational, what we're talking about. The learning organization is an ideal type of organization. Schlechty didn't create it. I mean, there were Drucker and Singy and others, but I think he did more to define what a school and school district as a learning organization would look like, with a focus on students as knowledge workers, if you will, as opposed to raw material and products. And as you know, Phil was known for, we need to work on the work as opposed to work on the kids. We need to work on the work as opposed to working on the teachers. And the work for superintendents is the system, as Steve McCammon mentioned earlier. And that is the work. And that's what Jim is all about.
Hey, Steve, if I could just take you back to the turn of the century. I had just become a new superintendent, and I think Jim Lloyd, I think this might resonate with him, especially. I had just become superintendent. We had found the Schlechty Center. We had joined a national network. And I had no experience leading a school district, but we flew to Indianapolis, Indiana, and we took a group of teachers to what was called a Working on the Work conference. And my assistant superintendent was on the plane ride back to me, and he said, Steve, you were so excited at the conference. You're pretty quiet right now. Why are you so reflective? And I said to him, I said, it's dawning on me how high leverage this is. Because if we are truly going to change the system and build the capacity to have a focus on student engagement, which we all would agree should be non-negotiable, what if we fail? What if, what if this doesn't take root? What if these cats in Louisville, Kentucky aren't what we think they are? What if these tools and frameworks? How can you ever go back as a leader and say, okay, let's hit a reset button, perhaps focusing on student engagement and providing capacity and tools and frameworks for teachers to think about designing engaging work for kids that meets their motivation? Maybe that's not our focus. Maybe we go and say, hey, let's go back into the testing arena. Let's go back and take advantage of the fact that our parents work at Boeing and Microsoft and Weyerhaeuser, and we have mostly kids with two parents at home. And let's just say, hey, school's fine the way it is. Man, that's high leverage. And that's why I think we're an organization that we don't appeal to every leader out there. You have to be fairly courageous to take this because, again, you can't set forth and say, let's change the system without saying to do what and to commit to be able to measure things differently. We don't go in and help people measure, hey, what's your latest highest test score? Those are all things that we think are kind of baked into focusing on student engagement. The last thing I would say is when I was with Jim's team that very first time, it's typical that people are like, okay, what are we getting into now? What's this? Who's this guy that came in? And I'll tell you what, they did a masterstroke thing that some of our school districts do. They did a student panel, and they had videotaped a student panel with kids from probably the second grade through. The teachers that were in the room looking at those very capacity standards, those aspirational, hey, let's dream big at Olmsted Falls City Schools, where people weren't quite committed yet to what that new vision might be. Everyone leaned in when the kids came on the screen. Everyone said, okay, this is non-negotiable. That's why we're here. That's powerful. And I think what our work does is it really says creating a new vibrant system to do what? If it doesn't matter for that exchange of fire between the kid and the teacher, then why would we put that effort forward? I follow Jim Lloyd on social media. Jim fights battles, man. Jim's out there fighting, protecting, and saying, hey, this is what's important to our community, to our kids. And I get that because he's put an awful lot of work in to building a system. When we first met with Michael Horning, and Michael said, hey, we'd love to see how your standards look in our tool. I was impressed that our two organizations have a common vision. The fit was seamless because he was saying, we have some great tools. It'd be great to be able to say, what if leaders were focusing on what you guys propose over here? It seemed seamless because you're out there working in the field with leaders all the time who really want their conversations with boards to be around these conversations, not in some cases the kind that they fall into by no fault of their own.
So we need to kind of be moving to close out here, but there's a thing going on in my head that I'd still like to check out. And Jim, maybe you're the first one to jump in on this, but it seems to me that if you transform the school system, you transform the community. Is that the bigger community?
Yeah, I think, as one goes, so does the other. I think part of the reason I think why Steve talked about courage. The school district has been around for 125 years, and then they were doing just fine before I came along, and they were doing just fine on all the test scores because that's how we determined our I guess, the quality of product that we would put out, or the goodness of our school district. And during this work, I guess in the last 10 years, not only with the Schlechty group, but then also with creating this new accountability system, your community needs to have a good understanding of what it is that you're doing and why it is you're doing it. And I think the people, our folks, understand that branding and marketing and communicating to them this new sort of vision of what it is that we've been doing is really, really important. And I think what I found now is that people are moving into our community because they believe in what it is that we're working on. You know, they believe and they've bought into this idea of inspiring and empowering kids. And in order to do that, it has to go beyond test scores. You can't focus just on that. Those I think come along with it. But we found people who move into the community and say, I want that. You know, there's lots of communities around, excuse me, that have high test scores, higher test scores than we do. And that's just not something that we focus on. And also, you know, whenever you have this sort of vision of inspiring and empowering, and you start to make good on it, you attract teachers, administrators, and others that want to be part of that work too. So I mean, that's what we've really have found is that as new people come into our community that live here, and as the people want to come and work here as well, that they believe in what it is that we're doing. It's not for everyone. As Steve said, you know, Schlechty organization may not be for everyone because it requires courage and it requires you to do stuff differently and behave differently. And there's risk involved in that, but the reward is so high, I think. And so, yes, to your question, Steve, we've seen the community transform in a lot of ways too. And the people that we get to come and work in our school district are different as well.
Well, guys, I want to give a chance for anybody to put a comment out here that you want to share before we wrap up. I'm going to start with mine. Expect to get an invitation from me to do this again, because I can tell we only we only scratch the top level of where your thinking is, and I just found the conversation amazingly engaging for me. So, any comment anybody wants to add here before we close out?
I'd add one quick comment. Between our two organizations, we have about 170 superintendents that we work with. And you know, Jim is indicative of those leaders. And you know, on our roundtable side, during the pandemic, they did a study. Why did superintendents? They did a study to say how many superintendents are thinking of leaving the field during this difficult time. And what the report showed was a wonderful surprise. They ended up reporting why, instead of how many were thinking of leaving, why were so many staying in spite of the difficulty. And it's because we have quality leaders who care. When we talk about courage, we're simply talking about superintendents who choose to focus on the right work. And that's what we're proud. We have a lot of colleagues like Jim, really glad he can put the voice forward about what that looks like in real practice, because he's somebody to watch.
Yeah, the only other thing I would say, I think, goes back to the community question. And it occurred to me as Jim was responding that what Jim has done and his district leaders have done is really reframing the question from how do we serve the community to how is it that we add benefit to this community. And I think it's really changed the conversation there, and it's changed the way they think about how they account for how they benefit kids and the community at large.
Well, thanks. Jim, was there something you wanted to add yet?
Yeah, I would just add, you know, one of the reasons why we're together is because of this super evaluation tool. And you know, there's a group of people that evaluate me, right? And that's the school board. And without them believing in this transformative work, and none of it would happen. I mean, they're not all they're some of them are Democrats, some of them are Republicans, some of them are independent. But one of the focuses for them is, and the only focus is on student learning and student involvement. And by having them put this in my evaluation, really just allows me to be able to go and do the transformative work. And so, you know, I'm thankful for that.
Thank you. Gentlemen, what's the easiest way that listeners might follow up with you with questions or to get more information?
With the Schlechty Center, they could go to Schlechty, www.schlechtencenter.org, and we have an info site there where people could reach out to us. I'd give you my email address, but between Schlechty Center and my name, we'd be another half an hour. So you can.
So we folks can find you there at the center.
Yeah,
so we'll be sure to put the connection to the center within the materials.
that'd be great.
Jim, how about you?
ofcs.net is our website. All the contact information is there. My email is easy, JLLOYD @ofcs.net. So email me. We don't have the market cornered on anything other than, I guess, courage and effort. And so come and visit. Be happy to talk to anyone.
Thank you so much, guys.